All right, here we are. Janet, how are you? Thank you so much for joining me on this. I'm so excited to talk to you.
Yeah. And I have to tell everybody, I just found out you're in Argentina,
I
but I, but I,
am.
but I didn't find out why.
I'm doing a little research down here for my next novel, and it just so
Okay.
happens to be some of the best fly fishing in the world in the same location. So
Yeah, it's
purely
real.
a coincidence,
Yeah.
as as I'm sure you know quite well from doing some research on your novels. It helps to set them in locations that we want to visit.
Yeah. Well, when I finally get a book that has exotic locations, like this book that's coming out now, it's COVID and I'm stuck at home. So like I had to Google everything. I like completely blew, my big opportunity to travel.
I know. Same thing happened to me for my fourth one. I had big plans to go to Israel and to go to Montenegro, and that just didn't happen. So but luckily we do have Google and can do these things.
Yeah.
But for everyone who's just tuning in, I'm sure everyone knows who you are, but just in the off chance that they do not. Number one, New York Times bestselling author, of course, author of, is it 47 books? Because I went in here because the bio has 25 Stephanie Plum series, but then I added a couple to that because I know that the 29th is coming out, I believe, in the fall. And then I went through this here in the front and I counted all of those, and that's 47 right here.
Yeah. I'm
That's
not sure if that's all of them, but it's close.
Wow. That
Yeah.
is incredible. Absolutely incredible. To include one you did, a graphic novel, multiple series. And then this is the new one, The Recovery Agent. It's a brand new series. And I think I'm going to start off. I have a few other questions for you before we get to the portion where we have viewer questions. But why start a new series now when you have one that is so highly successful that people are wanting to read as soon as it hits shelves? What was the inspiration for the new novel?
Just to have some fun. I mean, Stephanie Plum, I love Stephanie Plum, but I've been doing this for a long time, and it's local. It all takes place in New Jersey. And I have always been a big adventure fan, because when I was a kid, it was all about Uncle Scrooge. I mean, and it developed this lifetime love for the adventure movie and the adventure novel. And so for a long time now, I've just been wanting to do something that was worldwide, something, where I could travel. But of course, that didn't work out. But it is a series, so I have hopes for the next book. And I just have been thinking about this for a long time, wanting to do this. I'm a big Indiana Jones fan. I wanted to do my Indiana Jones.
You did. That was one of the first things I thought of in the first chapter, when we have hands getting eaten by pumas and all sorts of things going on in here. But Indiana Jones was exactly what I thought of, and such a fun book to read. Everyone's gonna absolutely love it. But before we get into a little more about that, I want to ask you about, you've done so many books, 47 probably plus. How has your process changed over the years from the first novel through today?
When I first started writing, of course, when I started the Plum series, I had to do a lot of research, and I hung out with cops and bounty hunters and bail bondsmen. And then after, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, what I realized is that I had that body of knowledge behind me, but what people really cared about were the characters and the relationships and the family and the community and the hot guys in the book. And so, which, was also good research, but, we won't go into that.
Got it.
Of course, they're all based on my husband, yes, I have to say that. But uh, so that's changed a little bit. I didn't have to do a lot of continuing research with Plum. But I think the big change was in the process, because in the beginning, I would do several versions of it. I would do a first draft and a second and a third and a fourth, and I would just keep, making corrections, and I would send it out to my family members and they would read it. And now my skill set is much better. And so now I start out with just a very brief outline. I know the beginning, I know the end, I know some plot points in the middle, and I know what I want to accomplish with the characters and the progression of the relationships of those characters. And then I just start writing, and I just start with page one. And when I go to bed at night, I have a steno pad. I take notes about what I did that day and where I want to go tomorrow, or maybe the day after tomorrow. And I just write. And when I'm done, I mean, it's done. I really do only one draft, and then I hand it out to my family members, who are always my first editors. And they make suggestions, and I, follow them, and then it goes in. And so the process has speeded up now. So it really takes me, where it took me a year to write a book for the first couple books, not the romances, but when I moved into mystery, it takes me maybe 4 or 5 months now.
Ooh, that is so good to hear. So a lot of my questions are personal in nature, because I'm trying to pick your brain a little bit, because I'm fairly new to all of this, and it's good to know that the process can speed up, because right now it's taking a full year. And I was supposed to introduce myself. I forgot to do that, because everyone is certainly here for you. So they might be like, "Who is this person that's asking you these questions?" So I'm Jack Carr, author of the Terminal List series. I was supposed to say that. So that's who I am, and that's why I'm asking you questions. And we share the same publisher now with Simon & Schuster, Atria, and what an honor that is to be able to share that publisher and then be here with you. So
Especially since I started there.
Okay.
I started, my first book was a Scribner book. And then, after a couple of years, I started floating around the publishing world. And now I'm back. So I feel like I've come home. And I have to say, I mean, I know, like this is supposed to be, my moment, but I actually have been very excited about doing this with you, because I Googled all my knowledge, but you lived yours. So I don't do a lot of reading, because when I read fiction, it interferes with my own process. But I am going to read your book, so I'm hoping like I learned something.
Oh.
No, yeah, because you have this just awesome background. I'm jealous. I'm really jealous. I mean, my whole big experience was when I went around with the cops. They gave me a gun. They said, just shove it under your waistband or your jeans, and because I'm not a gun person. And I was like totally, terrified I was going to blow my privates off. I mean, it was just, I mean, it's a strange feeling the first time you're working with a gun.
Interesting. Oh, well, thank you so much. Yeah, it was a good 20-year run in the military, but I always knew this is what I wanted to do after transitioning out to the private sector, and I've always been a reader my whole life. My mom was a librarian, so it was just a very natural thing for me to do, and I feel so fortunate.
A librarian.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So I grew up surrounded by books, love of reading Tom Clancy and Nelson DeMille and AJ Quinnell and JC Pollock and Mark Olden and Stephen Hunter, and just all the people really from the early 80s all the way up to the mid 90s. That was kind of like my formative years, and they really gave me my education in the art of storytelling by being a fan first.
My formative years were Robert B. Parker.
Of course. Yep. Of course.
He was such a wordsmith.
Yeah. I think coming from the fan side of it, like being a reader first, I don't know how you could be a writer or author really at any time without being a reader first, and being a fan first, knowing what you like, knowing what you're passionate about, knowing what you want to read next and from whom. And so I just being a fan, I think has certainly helped. That's for sure.
You don't look like a librarian.
Well, I grew up with one. My mom is still one, so I was surrounded by books constantly. So it was just a natural part of our life growing up was reading, just like breathing and eating, really. But speaking of, so Robert B. Parker, but how has publishing changed over the years from your initial foray, and how did that start, by the way? How did you find an agent? Did you always know this is what you were going to do? How did this all come about?
No, I was always the kid that could draw. And I went to, when I was in college, I majored in fine arts. I was a painter. and, struggled with that for a couple of years after college and realized it just wasn't the right spot for me. It was just too vague to communicate with people. And that was what I really wanted to do, was to communicate and to entertain. And so one day it occurred to me, that I should be a storyteller, because that was what I always did with my paintings. I was telling stories. And so I started trying to write, and I thought, I was newly married. My husband has his doctorate in mathematics, but he was teaching and we didn't have a lot of finances behind us. So I said, I'll write a book and I'll be rich and famous. They'll make it into a movie, it'll be fantastic. So 10 years later, I was still unpublished and I was not rich and famous. But I loved writing. Even though I was not a success, I just couldn't stop because I just loved writing. I loved getting up in the morning and going into that world, this whole new world that you created, that then you have this privilege of living in, for part of your day. And so I changed from writing very bizarre books to writing romance novels. And that was how I first got published, with the little category romance. And back in those days, you could send it directly to the publisher, get put in a slush pile. And so I was published that way by having an editor pick my book out of the slush pile. And then I got an agent after. I think it's so difficult today. I mean, it's just, you really can't do anything without an agent. You can go to Amazon and essentially get self-published. But I think it was much easier when I first started I had people helping me.
Interesting. Yeah. I'm lucky that I did not know I needed an agent, because had I known that, I might have not sent it to Simon directly to Emily Bessler at Emily Bessler Books at Atria Simon and Schuster. And I would have tried to find an agent, and I might still be looking for one. So I got very lucky, but our journey sounds semi-similar in that respect. But yeah, she loved it. And next thing you know, we're off to the races. So I did it the opposite way that you're quote unquote supposed to do it these days. Right. And it happened to work out. But how about when ebooks come on and then audiobooks come on and things change? Yeah. And how do you just keep doing the same type of thing, and that's just changing, or are you adapting as you're seeing changes in publishing?
No, I really didn't adapt because I was doing what I was doing. But the business end of it was just, a huge change. And I think, I was fortunate because I started out as a romance writer. And as a romance writer back then, you really didn't get a lot of respect. You had to make your own way in the world, and you didn't get a lot of help publicizing your book. And so you had to learn how to be a business person and how to do it yourself. And that really served me well, especially when it started to putting up a website. I was one of the first to put up a really entertainment style website, and that helped a lot. My daughter did it for me. She has a film and photography background. And then when ebooks started, that was huge. And, all of a sudden, something like, 80% of my sales were ebook. Wow. And it's gone back the other way now. I have a lot of hardcover sales because people like to keep me on the shelf. They like that collection, and which I do too. I mean, I read, both ways. I spend a lot of time on the screen, but there's nothing like having that book to hold. And if you love it, to have it up there in your collection. So publishing has changed a lot on the business end, but it has not changed a lot on the creative side. What changed a lot on the creative side a couple of years ago was when we started having to worry about political correctness. And cancel culture came in, and you couldn't appropriate, braids if you were not an Indian, all that kind of nonsense. Because I write like the most politically incorrect book. I mean, it's a Jersey book. It's full of cussing and stereotypes, which are real, and so Fortunately, I was never pulled on the carpet. I was never sued. I never had anybody protesting outside my house, but it was worrisome. I mean, it was something that you thought about. And I think things are loosening up now a little bit. And Lula is still Lula. I think for a couple books, Lula might not have had a color.
Hmm.
They were, they were not, everybody was green, and then you didn't have to worry about all of that stuff. But that really has been the only creative change that I've seen. But the business side of it is, and you have to really know how to self-promote. You have to be very aware of all of the social media out there and use it to your advantage. I mean, and it takes time. I mean, it takes up time that you could be writing, but it's essential.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I had no idea about social media. I thought that I would just move to the mountains after I got out of the military. I'd write a book, I'd send it to New York, and I'd start the next one. I had no idea you had to know about marketing and advertising and social media engagement and budgets and everything you would have to do for really any small business. So that came as a surprise. And it's interesting that you bring up cancel culture, because that's one of the things over the last year and a half, 2 years that I found interesting, is that even people in a space that were traditionally guardians of the opposite of cancel culture, standing up for anyone's right to say what, even if they disagree with you vehemently, standing up for their right to say it. So it's interesting to see some authors actually calling for cancellations and censorship. I found that very interesting to watch as things have progressed over the years. So I'm so glad that you are standing strong. And
yes, I'm very anti rules and cancel culture. And, I mean, that because that's what it's all about. And I write with a lot of humor. And that's one of the purposes of humor, that we can address very difficult things in a non-threatening way. And so to have to worry about, not doing that is a very bad thing. Because I just think it's important, and freedom of speech. That's, it's what this country was founded on. It's right. Really important, and we're talking about the business side of it. The other thing is that it's very difficult if you don't get a television show, if you don't get a movie. I had a movie; it was not a great success. Was a while ago. I would love to have television because I'm very visual, and I always see, when I'm writing, my books are always movies in my head. I see them moving around like that. And so you have a television show coming up with Chris Pratt. Are you kidding me? Get out, yeah. I especially love him because he was a bum in Maui. Yeah. And, and like, I'm in Hawaii now. I spend, part of the year here because I have grandchildren here. I have the grandma house. And so he just, hung out on the beach and okay.
Thank you. Yeah, he's such a nice guy in real life. He's just the way you would think. He's just a normal person, stand-up guy, someone you want to have a beer with or a glass of wine with, or just watch a game with, or whatever else. Just incredibly nice person. And everybody made a point on set of coming up to me and saying, hey, I've worked on hundreds of films in Hollywood and none of them have felt this way. And I think that's because of Chris's leadership up there, just his personality and his humor, and the way how he treats everyone. So that just comes spread throughout the entire set and all the cast and crew. So it was a special experience. July 1st. So fingers crossed.
Well, I'm jealous. I'm jealous. Oh. Yes, I hate you.
This would be a great movie right here. And that's because I pictured, as I was reading it, I was picturing it in my head as a movie. And I thought it was just me as a child of the 80s, picturing things like that in my head as a movie. But so it's interesting to hear that you do that.
Totally my process. Yeah, it's totally my process.
Yeah, I think it's very natural to do that, I think, when we're creating something, because you have to imagine it. And how else would you imagine it other than happening, actually happening?
So, well, and one of the ways, one of the tools that I have, I was writing very wooden dialogue. I really sucked at dialogue. And so, but I had a friend who was teaching acting, and I took some improv acting classes, where I had to get up on stage and walk around and create dialogue, and you bring props and you think about mannerisms and what sorts of things, voice tone, mannerisms show character. And so that was the way that I actually learned how to write dialogue and how to create character, was by being on stage and doing improv.
Well, that's fascinating. What great advice that is. I find that I get to know my characters through the dialogue. And as I start, I have a name and then a position like president of the United States or whoever it is. But then I don't really know them yet until I start writing them in conversation with another character. And then their personalities develop, their characters develop over the course of putting them in conversation with other characters. And that's one of my most favorite things to do, is develop them through dialogue. Yeah, I love sitting down.
Yeah, I read a thing about John Travolta, and he said he has to figure out how his character walks.
I can see that with him.
Yeah, yeah. And after he figures out how the character walks, then he knows who the character is.
Interesting. Yeah, no, there's a ton to that. I think that's fascinating. And I want to ask you, is there any advice that maybe someone gave you when you were starting out that you didn't take but wish you had? Or is there anything that you wish you had done differently that you look back on and say, if only I'd done that there? Or are you just so happy to be where you are and continuing to crush it with each and every book that comes out?
Yeah, no, I think, but I did have some advice that I thought was very good advice. And it was, don't hold anything back for the next book. Just, put it all out there and be in the moment and write the best book that you can with all of your great ideas. And the second piece of advice was, stop rewriting chapter 1.
That's a good one.
Because you have a tendency to do that, especially in the beginning.
Yep. I find that it gets the most attention, the prologue, chapter 1, 2, 3. And then as I get towards deadline, it's less and less focused because you're coming up on a deadline, it's just naturally how it goes. But I like that. I think I'm gonna take a lot of this advice here. This is fantastic.
Yeah, I know. Well, I should get your phone number, and then you can help me with all the technical things about, killing people and blowing up stuff. And
Absolutely. I'm more than happy to help you anytime with any of that stuff. That's where I excel in real life and on the page. So please feel free to reach out anytime. I love that the questions about that advice, because I'm always curious with someone who's so successful and has seen so many different changes in publishing, if there's something that they wish they had done earlier, especially when they're so successful. Is there like a little tweak that they would make? So it's interesting. I love that you're just happy to be where you are and just dominating in the space. It's amazing. I'm also curious, did anyone give you any really bad advice, or did anyone try to discourage you as you were starting down your path early on?
No, I mean, I was unpublished for 10 years. I mean, I sent out, I got rejection slips. Like I sent books out for 10 years. And the only thing that kept me going really was my family and the fact that I loved what I was doing. And I had this incredibly supportive family who, I had 2 kids who never said, I need new sneakers. Why don't we go on vacation? They just said, you can do it, Mom, keep at it. And so, I was really lucky with that. Some of the rejection letters were brutal. I mean, I had a rejection letter on a cocktail napkin written in lipstick. I had, by the time I was published, I actually had a big packing crate full of rejections. I mean, I started collecting them in a shoebox, and then it grew. And I had actually given up after 10 years of rejections, and we sort of needed some money, and I was taking odd jobs, and I said, that's it. And I took this big box, this carton out, and I sat on the curb and I burned them all. I wish I had kept them now.
Oh,
and burned them all, sobbing, crying. My life is over. I'm never going to be a published author. And then I had a suit that I borrowed from my sister, and I went out and I got a job with Manpower. And I worked at that for something like, 4 or 5 months. And the call came through that Ann Parsons Smith, this fantastic editor, was going to buy my first romance novel for the Second Chance at Loveline. And that was, that was how it all started. So I had a lot of rejections, but I never really took, I never really had anybody, physically say to me, your writing really sucks. You should go get a job.
Good.
Yeah.
I guess that's good. Sometimes like I found that people's looks were very similar when I told them I was going to write thrillers, very similar to how they looked at me when I said I wanted to be a Navy SEAL, just knowing how
Yeah.
hard it is to get through that training. It was kind of like, you'll grow out of it. You get this look like, that's nice. Kind of saying you want to be an astronaut or you want to, when
Yeah,
you're a little kid,
exactly.
you
Yeah.
keep saying it as you get older, but the looks remain the same. And those same looks I noticed when I said, people would ask, what are you going to do when you leave the SEAL teams? And I'd say, oh, I'm going to write as I got closer to getting out. I didn't say it earlier on, but as I was starting to get out, and then right after I got it out, I'd say, yeah, I'm going to write. And they look at me with that same look. That is a look of discouragement. And there's some powerful looks, but I didn't pay any attention because just like I didn't pay any attention when people told me how hard it was to be a SEAL.
But
but
it's important that you articulate it. When I'm talking to people who are trying to get published and thinking about writing, and one of the things I say to them is that when they say, what do? You have to say, I'm a writer, because you have to believe it. You have to believe it. You have to have enough courage to say it out loud. You have to have the guts to put yourself on the line. Even if you're not published for 10 years, there's something about saying, I'm a writer. I'm going to write a book that I think is just important. It's gets your head in the right spot.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. After I left the military, I hadn't submitted the book to Emily Bestseller at Simon and Schuster yet, but I was on a plane to Mozambique to do research for my second novel, True Believer. And on the customs form, as I flew into either South Africa or Mozambique, it says occupation, and I wrote down writer or author. I forget which one, but I wrote that down on, even though I hadn't submitted a book, I hadn't, it was done. I was still editing that first one, getting it as good as I could get it before I sent it to New York. And I got that idea from Stephen Pressfield, who in the book called Turning Pro about creativity and really just sitting down to do the work, how important it is doing exactly what you just said, which is in your mind, becoming a professional at whatever that is that you want to do. So writer, I was like, hey, I was a professional, essentially a soldier, and now I am a writer, and has made that
Because,
switch.
actually writing takes, you have to have a pretty thick skin, and you have to have some guts to be a writer, because it's a scary experience. And people think, well, it gets easier and easier, but it doesn't, because then you're meeting expectations. And every book that you hand in, at least for me, there's always this terror that it's going to disappoint. That, yeah, your last book was okay, but this one is, sucks. And you're disappointed. And I live in fear of always disappointing the reader, of not meeting their expectations. And so it's a good job. It gives you a lot of freedom, and you have the privilege of going into a new world every day and doing this and making things. But it's scary, and it's actually a very hard job. You have to have a lot of discipline to get a book out.
Oh yes, that's I found that out with each and every one of these, and I had that same experience. As I want to put all my time, energy, and effort into these because the reader has trusted me, not just with their finances by buying it, but with their time that they're never going to get back. And they've trusted me with this time. And so I take that so seriously, which is why every single sentence gets all of me poured into it. And then there's always that little thing in the back of my head, like, oh, what if Emily doesn't like this one? And luckily she's loved all of them. So I haven't had that, had to deal with that yet, but it is there. And it keeps you going. It's almost like a fire that kind of keeps you going and doing your best work, because you don't want to disappoint fans or yourself or family, those depending on you. But it's interesting you mentioned the thick skin also, because today everyone can reach out and tell you exactly how much they didn't like it on social channels, on Amazon reviews. It's all there if you choose to take a look at it. It's not like, let's say 30 years ago, where there would be a review in X, Y, or Z publication, and those were the places that it was. And if you read that review, oh, then you saw it, but you didn't see, there weren't hundreds of things to do on Amazon, and now that's an option. It wasn't all
Yeah,
those
you
years
know,
ago. So that's a
I
thing
don't
maybe.
I don't read them. I don't go
Good.
there. I never go there. I don't read fan fiction. And I don't read the reviews, at least not right away, because what I find is that frequently people will come on right in the very beginning. The haters come on, and they may or may not have actually read the book, or
Mhm.
you know, the people that have had a bad day, or I don't know. um, but frequently there will be some really ugly reviews in the beginning, so I don't, you know, I find that discouraging and painful, and I don't go there. But after a year I'll go back and I'll look when I'm sure that I've got, you know, 4.5 stars out of 5.
Right.
And then I'll read some, you know, but
Yep. No, and you know your sales by then. So you're like, hey, regardless of what this person said, X number of people certainly liked it. So you're kind of going in with that as well. I try to flip it around. I do look at them, but I take the negative ones and I print them and then I read them for my YouTube channel. And I have a little funny reaction. I try to twist it into something positive, which is kind of fun, and people seem to like it. But you know, before we get, I'm looking at the time and we're moving right along. And I do have these fan questions, and I know everyone is here for you because you were so amazing, and everybody wanted to ask something. But before we get to those, recovery agent, can you tell us a little bit about when you could have chosen anything to write about? Why a recovery agent? And I think I know because I've read it, and what we talked about as the inspiration at the beginning of this. But what's a recovery agent for people who don't know, in order to frame the new book here?
it's about a woman who is good at finding things. She works for insurance companies, going after insurance fraud. She works for billionaires who might want her to find something that's been lost for years. She comes from a small town in Scoon, North Carolina, and she just has discovered that she's good at this, and she has a very good life. She has a condo in New York City, but she travels all over the world. And this takes place in a lot of exotic locations. It and it also, but it has some of the same. It has the same voice as my other books. So I have this kick-ass heroine, which is very different from Stephanie Plum, who kind of succeeds because she's very tenacious and lucky, and she has people helping her. But this woman does it all. She's just the exact opposite of Plum. She's a gourmet cook. She's a fashionista. She's a martial arts expert. She likes it, you know. But in this book, she also is related to Blackbeard in Recovery Agent. She's related to Blackbeard, and she has that sort of that pirate lust in her. And she is divorced. And it turns out that the treasure that she wants to go after is in her ex-husband's house in St. Vincent. And so she has to go out there and try to get this treasure map from her ex-husband. And of course, you know, it turns out that there's still a lot of attraction between the two of them, but all of the reasons why they were divorced are still there too. I mean, they can't stop arguing with each other. And so he will not allow her to go after the treasure without him. So here you have this team of this man and woman who are attracted to each other and hate each other. And they're constantly, you know, sniping at each other. And I love that. I mean, and that was the fun part about this, is the tension between these two characters was a lot of fun for me, because I think that the fun part of a romance is always the chase. As soon as, you know, like I was a big fan of Moonlighting.
Mhm.
And as soon as Maddie and Dave did it, it was all over for me. Like, done, you know, move
I think a lot of
on.
people, Yeah, I
Yeah.
remember that growing up.
So this gives me the opportunity, to have these two people in close proximity, but not, it's not going to turn into a family saga.
No, I think a lot of people in relationships will relate to the characters in that respect, loving each other, being at each other's throats. And I must say I did relate to Rafer. Am I saying it right? Because
Yeah,
I read
Rayford Jones.
Rafe. So, because I have a character actually in my books, Rafe, not without the R, and spelled a tiny bit differently. But I love that he owned a dive shop and all that stuff coming from my SEAL background. Of course, I love that and have thought about having characters that own dive shops in different parts of the world to kind of help my characters and their narratives as well. So I did relate to him in particular, and that was really fun. The whole thing was.
Have you ever gone diving in a lava tube?
Not in a lava tube. No, no.
I'm on the Big Island in Hawaii now, and not far from where my condo is. There are some lava tubes that people go diving.
Oh, interesting. I'm going to look that up when we're off. I never even thought of it. That I dove before I got into the military. I actually worked in a dive shop right before I went into the military. And then in the military, we do our military type diving where they take the fun out of most everything. And I haven't done it since I got out, but I've been wanting to reconnect, to take my kids, to introduce my kids to it. And we go to Hawaii as well every year. And I think I'm going to introduce them to diving over there, but I'm going to remember the lava tubes. That's fascinating. That sounds like something I would like to do.
Yeah, and they're on Kauai High Harbor.
Oh.
They have a dive shop there that takes people through the tubes.
Oh, I love it. Oh, I'm definitely going to look at that. We'll be over there soon, actually. Amazing.
Really?
Yeah, we're going over
You have
there.
to let me know. We can hang out.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll be there. I think in April, or I think that's on the calendar for April, right before my next book comes out. So, that would be so much fun. That'd be so much fun. And speaking of fun, all these people are going to be mad at me if I don't read some of their questions, because I'm having so much fun talking to you. I just
we
keep
got to
asking
concentrate now.
questions.
Okay.
So yes. So moving into this section of the program, this one is from Mimi Johnson, and she said, "Was there a specific event that influenced you to write this book?"
No.
Got it. A simple answer. No. But yeah, I love how you wanted to do something different and be able to travel.
No, it was just something that I've been wanting to write for years now. So, but no specific event.
Got it. And we talked about this already, but I'm gonna Erin Miles, how long did it take you to finish The Recovery Agent? And we talked already about how much time it takes you to finish writing a book, but did this fall into that same 4 to 6 months?
Yeah, it did. It was on the longer side because I was creating something new, and I spent a little bit more time, obviously, on research, and I spent a little more time creating the characters to start with. So I probably worked on it for maybe 2 to 3 months before I even started writing. And then once I started writing, I think it was maybe another 4 or 5 months. So this first one was a little bit longer.
Got it. Now you have that foundation of research done. And so now we can speed up that process.
Next time they'll be in different countries, I'll have to do it all over again. So
Perfect. And this is from Abina Duncan, and who asks, what was your hardest scene to write in The Recovery Agent and why?
There wasn't really a hardest scene, but the hardest part of every book for me are always transitions. I think that this is the secret to making a book really move fast, is the transition. When you're moving the reader from one scene to the next, I spend a lot of time figuring out how to do this seamlessly so the reader doesn't have to stop and think about it. So it wasn't one particular scene, but it just as it is in all my books. The transitions are always, I have to stop and spend a lot of time figuring out how to do that.
Got it. And this is from Afreen Shavanis. What is the best way to build and maintain suspense in thriller novels?
Well, first of all, you can't do any padding. Every sentence has to count, because you're building to something. And I always start off in 3 acts. Because early on, I had an agent who said to me, "This book is really boring. You need to kill someone." And so I sort of look at it doesn't always end up in 3 acts, but that's the way that I plan it out. And at that pivot point, there always has to be some very terrifying thing happening. Somebody has to die. Somebody has to be mutilated, somebody. And now in my books, because of reader expectation, most of the horrific stuff takes place off stage. But it happens. But that's the way that I maintain reader suspense. But I think mostly it's that you have to keep your foot on the gas pedal. You can't have these, pauses where you're going into people's head and they're thinking about, God knows what. And
I like it. It's interesting. I do the same thing with the 3 acts. The first 4 novels were 3 acts with an epilogue and a prologue. With this next one coming out in May, In the Blood, is the first one that had 4, and that's just because it naturally lent itself to 4 parts. But I think the 3 acts or the 3 parts are something that people are familiar with, people kind of like for whatever reason, whether it's that's what they've been programmed to with movies and films and other books, or it's just something that's innate inside us that makes sense as far as groupings in 3s. But it's interesting to hear that.
And you're always so happy when you're done with that second act, aren't you?
Oh yes, everyone.
The sagging middle, So like once you get through that second act, you're like, okay, I got the ending now. I know where I'm going.
The sprint to the end. This person asked, Elizabeth Missoula Piper, what's your favorite suspense novel for inspiring your writing? So I guess what are some of your favorite novels?
I don't think I can name one specific novel, but like I said, I did start off reading Uncle Scrooge, and I still get comics. I'm still a comic book reader. Robert B. Parker was somebody that I looked to when I was deciding to move out of romance into mystery. And I find more inspiration from movies and streaming shows than actually I do reading, because I don't do a lot of reading because it interferes with my own writing. So, for this book, it was, movies like Indiana Jones and National Treasure and, all of those fantastic adventure stories, Thor Ragnarok and the Avenger movies. And, I'm big on superheroes.
I love it. I love it. That's so fascinating, because I found the same thing, having been a reader my whole life and looking forward to, the author's next book and just waiting for it to come out. But since I started writing, I don't do that as much unless I'm going to do an interview with them for my podcast, or I'm going to do a book signing with them or something like that, because I find the same thing. I don't want it to distract with what I have going on, and I don't want it to influence I have this body of influence, obviously this huge foundation that I'm building upon, but I don't want anything newer to influence in that space. So I do a lot more nonfiction writing, and then same thing, movies and series, because just by sitting down and enjoying them with my wife or my kids, there's still an inspiration happening. It's still influencing me in one way, shape, or form, just by being a passive observer, or an active one by saying, oh, this is really interesting, I'm going to find out a little more about that. So that's fascinating that you do something similar. I love it.
Well, and there's something about reading that you can't walk away from that. If I'm reading a book at night, when I wake up in the morning, I'm thinking about that book and not my book.
There you go. Interesting. I hadn't thought of it like that before, but that's exactly right. That's exactly it. Interesting. Let's see. Here we have Vicky Letzo says, you have created many interesting and funny characters. Who is your favorite and why?
One of my favorites is Lula in the Plum series, because she's just more of everything, and she's such a positive character. She just, goes from one situation to the next. She has confidence. She's like my heroine, Stephanie Plum, on steroids. and she's fun. She's just a lot of fun to write. So she's definitely one of my favorites. I also like Diesel from the Wicked series, and the Rafer in this series is patterned after Diesel to some extent, because they're both just these big scruffy guys. They, walk into a room and kick their shoes off, and they stay there until, they're ready to go looking for their shoes again. And those are probably my two favorite characters.
Interesting. And they were so likable. And I thought when I was starting to write also how important it would be to have a likable character, because people were going to be spending so much time with them. Why would you want to spend time with someone who is not likable, unless you're a miserable person anyway? So I was very deliberate in wanting to create a character that was inherently likable. So that's what you have here, especially for me being a guy with Raver.
Yeah.
Here we go. Lisa Daly says, why is food so important in all your books?
Because it's important to me. I gain like about 10 pounds every time I write a book. And then when I finish the book, as soon as it goes into editing process, I'm immediately back on a decent diet, and I'm trying to get some exercise. And, but also I think food says a lot about a character. It's another one of those ways that you learn about the character. Does this guy drink beer, or does he have a glass of wine? And what happens when somebody is feeling depressed? What do they eat? Do they not eat, or do they eat junk food? Or what is their favorite food? Do they do they go out to fancy restaurants and have niçoise salad, or do they, go to McDonald's and get a Whopper? I mean, so it's a really good way of showing the reader who this person is.
Oh, exactly. I do something similar as well with food, with weapons, with vehicles, because all these things tell us something about that character, and they're all opportunities to develop that character. So I do something very similar. I love it that you do as well. Let's see. Nanette M. Miller asks, how do you come up with the different character names in the books?
A lot of them come out of my high school yearbook.
No way.
Yeah, well, I especially for Plum, because I grew up in a little immigrant town in New Jersey, and so it was all Kolakowskis and Wisnowskis, and so a lot of the names just are combinations of people that I knew, and I think names are very important. That's another thing that I spend a lot of time on. Because the name, first of all, it has to be memorable. If it's a secondary character that you only see a little bit of, maybe not so much, but names they have to stick in your reader's head, and they have to suit the character. So I spend a lot of time on names, just thinking about them.
Yep, so do I. And it's very interesting in that some that I put in as placeholders, because I can't just write XXX or YYY or something, and while I'm thinking about it, they need the name in my head. Just like I like the title, I have the titles before I start as I'm doing the outlining phase, because I don't want it taking up bandwidth in my head as I'm writing. Like, what's the title of this going to be, or what's this character's name going to be? Because that's bandwidth that's not focused on developing that character or the storyline. So the names are so important. But a couple of times has happened where I put a placeholder name in, not an XYZ, but an actual name, and then I just got to like that person with that name as I went throughout the rest of the story, and that ended up being their name in a few cases.
Well, and it could also be that the name helped you develop that character to suit the name.
It's 100% possible, probable actually. Yeah. Let's see. Denise Wellman asks, what gave you the initial idea for the Stephanie Plum series? And she says she loved it.
For the Plum series, it was Midnight Run with Charles Grodin.
Great movie.
Yeah, because I was leaving, I knew I wanted to leave romance because I needed more than just relationship. And I was searching around, I was doing a lot of reading mysteries, and I saw that on television, and it was immediately, that was it. because I knew that I didn't have this large body of knowledge behind me. So I didn't think I could pull off a cop. I couldn't pull off military. There were a lot of female detectives out there. I didn't think I could compete with Sue Grafton, but I saw this and I said, bounty hunter, huh? You don't have to know a lot to be a bounty hunter, you know?
No offense to bounty
Um,
hunters in the audience.
yeah, and you kind of have your own special skill set, and they have un real power. I mean, much more power than police. You sign that agreement to have bail bond posted, and that's it. I mean, they can go after you and knock down doors and don't need a search warrant, and they can wear whatever they want. So I didn't have to have, I knew I wanted a Jersey girl, and I didn't want her in, like cop shoes walking a beat. So there were a lot of things that appealed to me, but it was a midnight run. And then the other thing was that I was watching Barney Miller. I mean, because remember, this is a long time ago.
Remember?
And Barney Miller was one of the first television shows to have an ensemble comedy cast.
Mhm.
So that you had 4 or 5 people all in a room together with all equal parts. And I thought that was genius. Instead of having my heroine hanging out all by herself, I could create this world of characters around her that were always there. It was Seinfeld before Seinfeld was there.
That is fascinating. I thank you for that memory. I've not thought of that. I used to watch that with my dad growing up. I've not thought of that show in a long time. But Midnight Run, I can totally see that inspiring the Stephanie Plum series now that you mention it.
Yeah.
And I think people are just fascinated with bounty hunters in general because it's something that, you know what a police officer is, you kind of know what an FBI agent is, you know what the CIA kind of does, you know what the military does. But these bounty hunters, like, what are they? Wait, what? It's a private citizen that's just hunting people down. And how is this legal? Oh, it is. And it's fascinating history too. And people that grew up with like Wanted Dead or Alive with Steve McQueen or that sort of a thing, they have a touch
Yeah.
point kind of
It
with
has
the
real
old West.
cachet.
It's
It
really,
has
yeah, it does. That's fascinating. I love it. Let's see. Are the Stephanie Plum characters based on real people?
Yeah, they're composites, but the grandma in the Stephanie Plum series is a combination of my grandma Fanny and my Aunt Lena. And I mean, if you hang out with me, you have to really watch what you say because you can end up, as a character. Yeah, no, I make composites, but there definitely are people that I know that are, stuck in there.
Well, it's fascinating. I love that. Let's see. Who are your favorite authors or books? We talked about Robert B. Parker already. Would you have any other ones that come to mind?
Um, no, I mean, when I used to read Bob Craze and Michael Connolly. I sort of came up with those guys. I feel like that's my graduating class
Mhm.
in mystery. So they're some of my favorites.
Yep, and that's quite the class right there. And here we go. Kathy Gunn asks, "What did you read as a child, or what would you recommend for children growing up to be reading these days?"
Well, I mean, I was a comic book reader. I read Uncle Scrooge and Little Lulu and then superheroes. I also went through the whole Black Stallion series, the
Yeah.
Walter Farley books, and but I was never um, a real serious reader. My background in reading is probably pretty pathetic because I just always loved comic books. And then I went to graphic novels. And if you wanted to say like, what is one of your favorite books? Like I would say, Cowboy Bebop, which is a manga, not the one that's on the screen, but the actual manga, Cowboy Bebop is awesome.
No kidding. Oh, amazing. And here we have, so you had Blackbeard the Pirate in this. Where did you find an interest in pirates? And did you do any supplementary reading or watching of pirate related content?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I don't have anything in my head right now, but I spent a lot of time Googling pirates and Blackbeard and looking at the history. And I knew I wanted her to be searching for some lost treasure. And, I mean, there was a lot of work that went into the timeline of she has Francis Drake's diary. And she's in the jungles of Peru. And so I did a lot of that, but nothing that I could, point my finger at right now. But there's so much good stuff online and on television. I mean, you just you just go to Amazon and Netflix, and I mean, you could use an entire lifetime
Yep.
looking at it all.
Yep. People ask me about research as well, and that sort of a thing. And I always think about, hey, you can research forever now. It's not like going down to the library back in 1980 and sitting there and going through some books and finding some good periodicals and then coming up, making some notes. You have the internet, and you can essentially never write your book because you will just continue to research always. So eventually you've got to just go and you got to do it.
And that is a problem, because it's a lot more fun doing the research than writing the book sometimes.
Sometimes
it's hard work. Yeah.
And they get you because you're doing research on something for the book, but then it knows how to get you to click on something next. And it's like, oh, if they like this, they're going to like this. It might have nothing to do with the book, but it's semi-related to whatever you researed. And then off you go. For me anyway, now I'm down another rabbit hole, and I gotta
maps of the Andes, and and of Peru, and figuring out where roads go. And
that's fun. That's really fun. I mean, I'm not far from there now. I'm not far from the Andes right now. So interesting. And speaking of these different places, and I know we're getting to the end here, so I'm going to start wrapping things up. But your characters go to some exotic locations in this book, The Recovery Agent. Can you give us a hint on where they might go next?
Well, they're in Peru a lot. They're in New York City because that's where she has a condo. Costa Rica, they do diving there, in Drake Bay, and Santa Barbara. They end up in Santa Barbara. That's one of the few places that I've been to: New York City and Santa Barbara, and the rest I had to Google. Thank you, COVID.
Not a bad spot. And then I know fans will be very upset with me. I don't ask you about the next novel in the Stephanie Plum series, Going Rogue, which is coming in November. Can you share a little bit about that as we wrap things up?
No, I'm writing it now. And Stephanie's grandma is going to have a larger role in that one. And it involves a kidnapping. So
there we go. That's enough of a hint.
Yeah.
Yes. No more for anybody else. That's it. That's enough of a hint for you. So I think we've gone our hour. I want to be very respectful of your time. And I want to remind everyone that their signed copy of The Recovery Agent right here will be delivered in the next 8 to 10 business days. And extra copies of The Recovery Agent are available 24/7 on bn.com and at local Barnes and Noble stores. So, oh my goodness. Shannon, thank you so much for doing this. I sincerely appreciate it. I had a great time talking with you. I hope we can do it again. And I hope you'll reach out and ask me some weapons related questions in the future.
Yeah, I can't wait. And I want to thank all those viewers out there. Hope I see everybody in person on the next book.
Perfect. I'm sure you will. Things seem to be changing, so we can only hope. But thank you again, and thank you for writing another amazing novel. And hopefully, I'll see you in person soon.
In Hawaii.
I hope so. Not a bad spot. All right. Take care.